I can tell you that successfully we have fixed the problem. I have requested Mohan to start from where we lost the feet. So, Mohan, sorry for the inconvenience what caused, and over to you. We can start the presentation from here.
Thank you, Sumit. I understand. Can you see my slides at this point of time?
Yes, yes, we can see. You can go to presentation mode. We can see your slide.
Yes. Again, it's not something which was planned. So therefore, let me hope that this will continue. Just give me 1 second, please. Okay, that's fine. So therefore, I set the setting for all of you and then said there were 5 imperatives that were there. I just picked these 5. There could be many more, as I said. The first among them is to do with education, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Because if we truly want to become self-relevant, there have to be more amount of product creation that has to happen within a country, large amount of IP that has to happen within the country. And that will not just say that, look, industry will create the IP or just startups will create the IP. To me, the start point is all about education. I spent personally a considerable amount of my time on the national education policy in the recent past. And we actually did one more piece of work on reforming the technical education itself. I wrote this report way back in early 2019, which got implemented from the academic year 2019-20. That's the pre-COVID era. But what primarily education has to do is we have to train our children to make sure that they probably get more into critical thinking, design thinking, experiential learning. These are some of the things that have to happen. They have to start challenging the status quo. They have to have the ability to take risks, work in teams, have patience. Only then we will see innovation coming out. Otherwise, if the status quo continues to be there, then we have a challenge. And once we have people who have the ability to innovate, then we need to move them into areas where they can empathize with the user, trying to define a problem, and then start getting ideas of how to solve the problem before we get to say or ideate the problem and then build a prototype. You build the prototype several times before you get to a situation where you know how to build the right thing, or how to build the thing right as opposed to build the right thing. So therefore, the first pillar that we have to strengthen in this nation is this ecosystem. No denying at all that there's a new education policy. There are several initiatives that are happening in terms of promoting innovation. There are a number of incubators that are coming in. I think Sumit also talked about my involvement in T-Hub, which is the local largest incubator center in India right now. And India also is rating itself to be the third largest incubation startup ecosystem in the world. But I think what we will need is more amount of deep technology, not copying from elsewhere in the world, but I think especially going and addressing the issues that we have with our real issues that we have and real social issues we have. So it's the local, real social issues is the first thing that I advocate, and that has to start point has to be from our education system. The second one that I think is that the ease of doing business. I just mentioned to you that we've come a long way. There's no denying at all. But I think still, I'm sure several of you are Bangalore based. And yesterday, there was this hilarious headline in Deccan Herald, I guess. It talks about the 38-year-old turmeric scandal. I was very curious to find out what it was. It was all about somebody cheating on an export of turmeric. And that ended more in terms of 1 week of jail sentence and 500 rupees of fine. But I believe it took 38 years to get resolved. So if we have such an elongated litigation system, certainly I don't think we can progress ourselves to become self-reliant. Or the other thing is, you look at the retrospective taxation that happens. Today in the newspapers, there's a news item which talks about auto firms being urged to cut royalty. No, there's an agreement. There is watertight clauses that are there. When we went to business, we decided this is the way in which it's done. You can't renegotiate the contract halfway down. You stop the product, you design a new product, that's good enough. But these are some of the things which are bothering us. I met with one of the other MNCs locally based out of Bangalore, doing extremely well, one of the top 100 Fortune 100 companies in the recent past. And he was saying still 12 years of their transfer pricing related taxation issues are still pending. So we have to make sure that we get this uncertain tax regime beyond us. Elongated litigation has to go away, and we got to get into a environment which will make sure that we are very comfortable with doing business in this country. And so we then lead on to the physical infrastructure, whether it is to do with the transportation infrastructure. Do we have even today, if you look at it, we have still challenges at the ports of entry, the amount of time that are taking. Given some of the challenges that faced with our neighbor in the recent past, most of the consignment got stopped. Every consignment got checked, and we didn't have technology to do anything which could be done as non-invasive. It was invasive, so it took a much longer time, which invasive would mean that I meant they had to open up the boxes, check them out, etc. And so also is that, do we have the enough infrastructure? We're seeing how there's no denying that cities were not built for 100 millimeters of rainfall. But at the same time, we can't bring cities to a grinding halt just because of rain. Or we did not design the right sewer system associated with it. Power and energy, certainly, I think we have come a long way. But again, I guess in the recent past, especially, I think, especially because of solar energy, power cuts in the summer has become a thing of the past. So we have done good, but I think there's a long way to go in terms of further strengthening our physical infrastructure. So is the case with the digital infrastructure. We still have a long way to go. We might be people who are living in the cities today, the urban infrastructure is reasonably good. But all the same, I have a drive. I used to have a drive because in the COVID era, I don't drive up to the office either. I'm sitting at home. But when I used to drive up to my office, which is no more than about 3 to 4 kilometers of drive, I knew for sure my line would drop at least once. And I know exactly the black spot that was there. Not that I was going into timber tour to get my phone line dropped. I was well within the city. So therefore, I think even the digital infrastructure in terms of networks, and especially in the digital world that we're talking about, where we have to service all the 1.3 billion people in this country, we got to get networks to the last mile. They are talking about GPONs, trying to lay the optical fiber. The faster we do, the better we are. So the second pillar, in my perspective, is to create the right infrastructure if we truly want to get to the Atmanirbhar Bharat. A third one is we have to provide more amount of incentives for especially creating IP. IP will be derived from R&D. We had a scheme by which 200% of our expenses, which are being spent on R&D, were deductible under income tax. Whereas effective 1st of April this year, it is becoming zero. It went to 200 to 150, 150 to zero from this year. So in effect, what it means, but the rationale the government is giving is that we reduce the income tax. So within that, you should be in a position to do it. So income tax reduction has happened to everybody. There should be some way of incentivizing people. So therefore, I think there is every need for government to reinstate this 200% deduction for income tax for the R&D spend, or the R&D expenses. We all scream at this point of time that the R&D investments in India are far, far lower compared to what happens elsewhere in the world. But it is true, there's no dispute at all. But we should also look at it from the incentive waypoint. And especially if you look at it, R&D investments only happen from government. Government gives those grants into CSIR labs, into some of the academic institutions. Private sector is not spending, but if you incentivize them, there's a good possibility that they'll spend. Speed up depreciation is one of the things that I talked about. And certainly, we built over a period of time a very large ER&D industry in this country. To some of my friends, to give you a flavor, it's a $30 billion industry right now annually. That's the type of exports we do with engineering R&D, which also includes products which are software products, and we can't distinguish between software product and a hardware product. So therefore, it's altogether it's about $30 billion industry, and we employ about 400,000 engineers in this particular activity. We have the early mover advantage. We have a very large base, and we have several of our multinational friends who are here on the call too, I understand, who have also created their GCCs, the Global Capability Centers. And certainly we need to encourage them further in terms of enlarging. So again, go back to that commitment the government gave. Government had a commitment called the SCIS, Software Exports Incentive Scheme, as it was called, or Service Exports India Scheme, or somewhere close to that. And in this particular scheme, people first said 5 years was the time period, but 4 years have gone by. This year, they have not even announced the notification. Notification has still not come out. Or originally, the tentative intent was that they will extend the scheme by 5 more years. That's not in sight. So therefore, if you announce schemes, you should be in a position to implement them. Implement them. If you change them, then there is a challenge in terms of continuity. So also, I'm making a very strong recommendation that GCCs coming into India are very important. I think they build a very strong ecosystem for us. They get benefited in many ways. They can access the Indian market space too. But equally important is they have, and I acknowledge, been responsible in making sure that the skill sets of the Indian engineers went up considerably because they had the ability, opportunity to work in leading edge technologies. That's my third pillar. Moving on, my fourth pillar is to certainly think in terms of bringing some amount of constraints, restrictions, because everything and anything cannot be imported. And then because India will have a disadvantage. I'll be very open, honest, transparent about it. If you compare some of the products that are there today in the world, can we say India will immediately in the next 3 months compete with them, and especially in defense, etc.? So I think we need to get some lead time to make sure that India becomes competitive. So it's a progressive way in which we are not saying completely ban, but certainly some amount of restriction on some of the products which are already there in India. And that's how the government of India came out with this list of 101 weapon platforms, which have now have got constraints in terms of imports for the next 7 years. That's the window that they're providing. Or for that matter, I think there is also a situation where second-hand equipment was being imported, refurbished, especially medical devices. We had dialysis equipment as an example that I know. And the other way of looking at it is that, if you truly want to become India self-sufficient, we can't be having product duties which are lower than component duties. There's some amount of adjustments that have been done. We're now saying it has to be much larger. That's one way of doing it. And the last one that I also have is some of the low-end products, which can also bring about a substantial transformation, which will also give enormous amount of cost advantage, which in turn means that will probably make them more affordable. We should be in a position to give them preferred market access. I talked at length about communication equipment. We still have to have the last mile connectivity. We need to get the equipment down there. We also have enormous amount of shift that's happening with the medical equipment. We need to get more amount of equipment at low cost, affordable, accessible, serviceable within India. So to me, actually, the Make in India, and I'm a strong proponent of it, to say Make in India, to me, it has to be innovated in India, it had to be designed in India, it had to be manufactured in India, it had to be supported in India. So therefore, if products made in India and medical equipment at the low end could be supported much, much better compared to the other way of looking at it. Or some of the future mobility could be other areas that we can focus on. So therefore, my fourth pillar is on import taxation and PMA. The last one is also to create clusters. If you want to provide more amount of momentum to indigenous manufacturing, make in India, make for the world, not necessarily just for India. But in that particular instances, I think we should identify a few areas, and we called out advanced manufacturing, sustainable energy, affordable healthcare, and smart cities as four pillars. And these four areas, sorry, use the word called pillar, but these four areas, there is certain amount of ecosystem already prevailing. For example, if you look at mobility or automobile, auto ancillaries, there's a fairly large amount of ecosystem. There's already a large base of vendors in cities like Chennai or Pune for that matter. Or smart cities, there are cities like Pune as well as Madurai or Coimbatore. Around that, if you can probably create this formation of clusters which can support these industries, I think will be in a position to accelerate a pace at which we can scale this particular opportunity. Moving further down, is that my belief, therefore, at the end of it, with all the challenges that we've had with the pandemic at this point of time, challenges we have with the economies, with the challenges we have with technology and the geopolitics, the way out of this is what happened way back in the 1929 after the Great Depression, was that it was led by industrial revolution. It was largely industries which brought out the economies and they started doing extremely well. It's the Ford T assembly, or it is the electronic production of radios, or oil and gas that got produced. It's all led by industry. It came, muzzled itself out into the world, saying the economies will still do well. My belief is this time it will be led by new technologies, which are largely new digital technologies. So, therefore, I think we have a great opportunity in front of us. The digital will be the green shoot we are seeing today to say the economies will come back to normalcy. It will be a new normal, which we don't know which the new normal is, because we stopped using the word called new normal, because as we continue to be in the COVID era, we don't know what the new normal is. So therefore, we are saying it's never normal. But at some point of time, when the COVID era comes to an end, we'll see a new normal evolving. And finally, what I'm saying is there are challenges. I talked about, I think, those five areas where I talk more about challenges. I am not at all ashamed of raising those issues in front of anybody. I'm not scared about them. I keep raising them on and on. Because unless we start saying this is reality, and then say with this, we start working on issues which are there, only then we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But in order to make sure we get there, we should have steadfast optimism. Only then we will come out of this. So that is what I would like to conclude by saying. Atmanirbhar Bharat is possible if we start realizing what the reality is, work towards the challenges that we have in order to make sure we capture that big opportunity in front of us. Before I finally thank all of you, I'll also like to thank the frontline health workers. They put their lives ahead of all of us. I'm sure everyone in this audience is safe, healthy, and it's all because of these frontline health workers. I take the opportunity to thank them and thank IESA for providing me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohan, for such a nice and inspiring talk. And while you were talking, I was talking to my colleagues in the room here, and I was telling them that since morning, this is a different kind of perspective what we are seeing here. And thanks for bringing all those perspective in front of the wider audience, and it was really great. So there are a few questions lined up for you. The first question is that what about the R&D investment you talked about, that will be one of the pillar to grow. So wanted to get your views on the roles and responsibility. That is it that MNCs you are thinking, or government, or the local venture capitalist? I mean, who should pump in enough money so that the ecosystem can grow here?
No, it is like this, Sumit. I'm not saying who should pump in the money. I'm also a very strong market dynamics advocate. I'm not saying, this can just go give money to some people. You are kind enough to read that I'm an IIT. I've been running IIT Hyderabad for last 8 years now as the chairman board of governors. And one of the themes that I have is I will never go and ask people for doles. I will go and tell them that, look, I have done this good work. I can do good work further for you. I can provide you, I have identified problems. I can provide solutions. Can you fund me? So therefore, I think people will come and fund areas where require that money, where there is capability. So it is not MNCs, it is not private, it is not government. All of us have to spend money, all right, but spend money based on what the needs are. That's the reason why I said, if you want to become Atmanirbhar too, you have to identify the local problems, which are the local problems, which are social problems too. There are plenty of them that are there. So therefore, I'm not prescriptive as where the money has to be spent. I'm only saying is government should provide those incentives for people to spend it much easier.
Okay, thank you. So there was another question from the audience that if the look at the electronic industry, I think everybody talk about fab, but nobody talking about the component ecosystem as well as the PCB ecosystem. So what's your thought on developing the starting from components and the PCB manufacturing in India?
So it's a challenge that we have in terms of whether the cart comes first or the horse comes first. Unless the volume comes in, pushing very hard at component level industry is not going to be very easy. So therefore, I'm saying right now, let's say, start asking people to build those products. As volume starts picking up, you'll see components also coming into play. If you now start saying, look, let's do the component part, and I think that way, I certainly like to recognize the government of India, especially MeitY, for actually pushing very hard on the smartphone manufacturing in India. And that will, it's volume actually, it's low cost, high volume. And as a combination of that, you'll start seeing a lot amount of action that will happen. There's a market too in India. There'll be a lot amount of skills that will come by. And once I think the volume starts picking up, the component industry will also start picking up.
Okay, thank you. And the last question from audience is that there is a lot of make in India or Atmanirbhar, but how much initiative do you see for making for the global or taking our products to the global level?
The thing is as follows: this is the opportune time to do something local. That is for sure. There couldn't have been any opportunity in the last 70 years of post-independent India that we have had opportunities of this nature. But I think I can't say, therefore, you just make it for global. No, you make it for local, which can also be exported. I mean, if you start looking at just exports alone in terms of product, I'm not too sure how far it will go. I'm talking of products, whereas in services, we have done extraordinarily well. For instance, engineering services, for instance, or IT services, or BPO, all of them have done extraordinarily well. But in terms of product, because there are many other challenges that are associated with it, you need to test them, you need to get certify them. You go through an iterative process, and that particular process cannot be done through a pure export market. So they should do first Indian markets, and definitely once you master that particular product, there are plenty of opportunities in terms of exports.
Okay, thank you, Mohan, for your insightful presentation. And it was great hearing you and this is from all of the audience. So thanks a lot. And please
Thank you.
give a big round of applause to Mohan for his extraordinary